16th of July. My name's Lynn Doherty and I'm the leader here at West Berkshire Council. The meeting will be chaired by myself and I have with me supporting me this evening my Deputy Leader of Council, Graham Bridgman. The other members of the executive are also present, who are also present here are Councillors Steve Arderwater, Dominic Bowick, Ross McKinnon, Richard Sumner, Joe Stewart and Howard Wollaston. Councillor Hilary Cole has sent her apologies for this meeting. We also have with us a number of other members present, including the members of the Shadow Executive and members of the Minority Green Party. These members are entitled to speak and ask questions when invited to do so by myself, but they are unable to vote on any of the items. You will also see we have a number of officers in attendance. We have our Chief Executive, Nick Carter, and the Executive Directors, John Ashworth, Joseph Holmes, and Andy Sharp. Shiraz Shakay will be the legal advisor to the meeting. I'm also assisted by Phil Rumans, who will be acting as the Zoom host at the meeting, and together we will, along with Stephen Shard, be managing this meeting for you this evening. Standard Zoom reminders are now about to be shown on screen. There they are. In addition to these points, I'd just like to raise that if it becomes necessary for any member to telephone into the meeting, you won't be able to signal to speak. So once everyone has raised their Zoom hand, I will ask if the person on the telephone would like to speak. Any voting necessarily is going to be taking place by a show of physical hands. And if we're required to adjourn within any point of this meeting, we will do so, and the executive will revise the time and date, and that will be known as soon as possible. Do any of the members here this evening with me have any questions before I proceed? Okay, in which case we can turn to item 1, which is our apologies.
Yes, Leader, one apology. Councillor Hilary Cole.
Thank you. Therefore, we can move forward to item 2 of this evening, which is the minutes. Members, we're being asked if we're willing to accept the previous minutes as an accurate record of the meeting. Are we happy to do so?
Leader, I'm happy to propose the minutes.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Does that find a seconder? I've got lots of people putting their hands up. Sorry, I'll take Councillor Arderwater. Can I therefore, we have a proposer and we have a seconder for the meeting minutes of the 30th of April 2020. Can I therefore ask members to indicate by raising their actual hand if they agree that the minutes can be signed as a true and accurate recording of the previous meeting? Okay, I can see that all of the executive have their raised hands, and therefore I'm happy to sign these meetings, Stephen, as a true and accurate reflection. We can therefore move forward to item 3 on our agenda this evening, which is declarations of interest. Stephen, have we had any declarations of interest for this meeting?
I have not been notified, no. Okay,
thank you. And we can therefore move forward to item 4, which is our public questions. First of all, I'd like to thank all of the members of the public that have submitted questions for this evening's executive meeting. And I believe that we are going to be able to present these on the screen so that everybody watching can see what questions have been submitted. I'll just give that a moment. In accordance with the resolution passed at the council meeting of the 29th of April 2020, I can confirm that you will all receive a written response to your questions and that these will be published on the Council's website within 5 clear working days of the meeting. And if you look there at the top, you can actually see the URL of exactly where that will happen. So thank you everybody for your questions, and please everybody that is interested in seeing the response, take a note of that URL at the top there, because that is where they will be published within the next 5 days. Thank you, Stephen. We can now move to item 5, which is petitions. Have there been any petitions handed in, Stephen?
I've not had notice of a petition, but I see Councillor Dillon has his hand raised at the moment.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Councillor Dillon, didn't spot that.
Sorry, Leader. It was just regarding the public questions. I just wonder how many of those were a carryover from the cancelled exec meeting, and how many were fresh questions, if you knew.
I don't know off the top of my head. I thought they were all new questions, but Stephen, do you have an answer to that, or can we provide one to Councillor Dillon?
I think for certainty, I'll provide after the meeting, if that's okay.
Okay, we'll get that over to you, Councillor Dillon.
Thank you.
So sorry, we were on item 5. We had no petitions, so that was relating to the last question. Therefore, we can move to the first main item on this evening's agenda, item 6, which is the post-consultation environment strategy. And I believe this is over to Councillor Steve Arderwater to introduce the report and propose the report. Before I hand over to Steve, does this find a seconder? Councillor Sumner, thank you.
Happy to second, Leader.
Thank you. So over to you, Councillor Arderwater.
Thank you, Leader. So as members will see from the papers at item 6, this item consists of a report on the consultation and changes that have been made to the earlier draft strategy, together with the updated strategy itself at item 6A. So firstly, I'd just like to talk through briefly the changes that have been made after the consultation. As we all know, the consultation took place, and then things were paused basically because of COVID. We were fortunate again that the process had completed, and in comparison with other previous council exercises, the consultation itself was far more extensive and broad-reaching. Very briefly, we, as well as the online survey method, we grouped a number of focus groups and engaged with, for example, schools, with members of the green communities, and members of the public who are able and willing to drop in and just to touch on a number of themes within the strategy. The strategy itself, again, has always and will always have to be a very broad document. It's a high-level framework. The key objective which it addresses is that which was set almost slightly over a year ago in our declaration of a climate emergency. In other words, the prime objective that the strategy heads us towards is the achievement of carbon neutrality within West Berkshire by 2030. We should all be well aware that this is an extremely challenging, though doable, target. It will only be met by a combination of effective actions and leadership and communication from this council, together with engagement and active choices by residents of the district. So in that sense, the consultation itself was an important part of building not only consensus, but quality and engagement from as many people as possible. And we absolutely need to build on this in terms of the achievement of the strategy. Looking at table 1 on page 31 of the report, there's a list of the high-level themes which we strengthened or improved or included for the first time in the strategy as a result of the consultation. And just to pick out a few, for example, agriculture and farming were items which we touched on very loosely at the start, but many people highlighted how, firstly, there is a lot of it, and secondly, the opportunity in terms of improving the environment from these two areas. So we have added not only references to that, but certainly our intent is to, throughout the delivery plan, which will follow on from the environment, feature much more possible projects and actual actions that relevant landowners and farmers can be encouraged to take forward to play their part. As well as farming, we've highlighted more on electric vehicles. We are going to and have highlighted more the lobbying of government in terms of new building standards to hopefully shift the market. And again, communications is going to be a very key item. So a large number of changes have been made. I've already had a lot of feedback on very recent versions, or indeed this final version. And again, as members will note, it has to be a high-level document which sets a framework, a strategic direction. And over the years, I'm confident that we will deliver projects which will fulfill this, challenging though that may be. In conclusion, members, I commend this new strategy to you. I hope to get your support and buy-in, and again, for us to continue the important direction towards carbon neutrality. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Arderwater. Councillor Arderwater, before I go to the executive for questions, just take Chair's privilege here. I'm very interested in the expansive consultation and engagement that was undertaken for this particular strategy. Can you tell me if you thought it was useful and perhaps why, and if you saw any disadvantages to this form of consultation?
Yes, absolutely. To deal first of all with the disadvantages, this certainly was a more involving and a more time-consuming exercise for officers than would normally be the case. So again, there was a higher investment in terms of time, both in terms of gathering information, consulting with people, and particularly we had a much larger range of input and data and consideration which fed into there. Having said that, I think that investment in time was greatly paid back by, again, the resulting improvement in quality, which we've achieved, again, all thanks to a broad and very good quality range of inputs from members of the public. It has helped us as the council, I think, to edge towards a more open style of leadership. Going forward, I'd suggest that this approach won't be necessary or appropriate in all cases, but I suspect there are many others which where members of residents are directly infected. There's a lot of passion and enthusiasm which we've been able to tap into, and again, I think that same spirit can be used by us in the future.
Thank you, Councillor Arderwater. Members of the executive, do you have any questions for Councillor Arderwater? And Councillor Sumner, I'm conscious that you're second in this paper. Is there anything you'd like to add to what Councillor Arderwater's talked about?
I'm happy to speak if there are no questions coming forward, Leader. I absolutely echo the comments from Councillor Arderwater. I think it's worth recognising the huge amount of work that's been undertaken by officers, the engagement of residents and members across parties to continue to develop this strategy. And I believe this continues to add to the forward motion that we've been rightly asked to provide. I think we all recognise there is a way to go, but I think we've got a very strong platform now to continue that push forward, and on that basis, I'm happy to second the recommendation of the report.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Sumner. Any other questions from members of the executive? Okay, in which case, before we take forward the recommendation of the report, I've got some questions from the benches opposite. So if I could start with Councillor Abbs.
Thank you. Thank you, Leader. Obviously member of the EAG, and I've been trying to give, the Heart Party has been trying to give support to this document so that it is a truly cross-party objective because the climate doesn't really care what colour we are. But there are still a few things in the strategy I think we can do better on, and it's becoming a theme, but I do think we can still be more ambitious. And I'll try and point out a few things. Page 40, for instance, point 18, which is the things we're not taking forward. There's only a couple of them. One of them happens to be a citizens' assembly. And a citizens' assembly basically means involving the public. So given that we certainly see the public and lots of people involved at the moment as being a resource, it's somewhat surprising to see it marked down as a drain on the council's resources. It's almost polar opposites for us. On page 67 as well, point 25, it talks about ease of reading this document. And I still think, I'm sorry to say, but 51% found it more difficult to read than easy to read. Only 27, I think it says in the document, 27% found it easy to read. We're going to it's hard, but we're going to have to keep trying harder and harder to make these documents so they can be absorbed, so the content of the documents can be absorbed by the public. And that's on us to kind of make the documents as easy as possible. So I think we can do better there. I was really pleased about page 118, because on page 118, it goes on about the amount of generation capacity that we're going to do. And I don't want to harp back too much, but I'm pretty sure we had an amendment motion in at the budget time suggesting, in fact, that we should build 21.5 megawatts of power station. And so I'm extremely pleased, and I've told Mr. Ardar-Walter to this effect, that I'm very pleased that you're actually committing to going ahead and producing this quantity, and it will be needed quantity of generation. In fact, you've got another item there saying another 20 megawatts on top of that, which is even better. It's just a pity we didn't take the advice at the time and put the 100k aside to actually get on with that study about doing it in some big lumps. And there's one last point. It's a bit geeky, but we start talking about ULEVs and super ULEVs and zeros. Our ambition should really be zero emission vehicles, but we talk about going for ULEV, which is still 75 grams per kilometre. And it's nuances like that will help us get to that. Yes, we've achieved, West Berkshire carbon neutral by 2030. If we press on some of these areas and just be a little bit more aggressive is the word I'm going to use, but a little bit more forward thinking in terms of the size of what we need to do. That was it, really. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Abbs. Councillor Ardar-Walter, would you like to respond to some of those points?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Briefly in order then, Councillor Abbs, your comment about citizens' assembly, again, I and advised by officers have taken that in the literal, actual sense of the word, which I think is very different from ongoing and continued listening to and engagement by residents. So while I'm not in favour of a formalised decision-making body of citizens, and frankly that is the role of this council, I am very much in favour of again, a wider engagement, not only in the consultation, as I was saying earlier, but ongoing. And I'm absolutely certain that we can and will set up new structures and ways for a useful ongoing dialogue, which absolutely will influence decisions over the coming years. So I don't like the formulation of a formalised citizen assembly. I do like thorough, open, and useful debate and dialogue with residents. Then your second point on simplification, I totally buy into, and as I think we've discussed several times, it's virtually impossible with a subject this big and broad, touching on many aspects of life, to produce a single document which is both simple and concise and easy to read, but also thorough and includes the many other details, some of which you mentioned, all in one place. I think what I'd like to see going forward is on the back of this fairly comprehensive document, a much smaller, more digestible version, potentially one aimed at schools. And again, this need not be the end of the story. So again, we've got something reasonably comprehensive. Absolutely, there are gaps to be filled, and one of those gaps is a range of content coming out of it, taking this forward. I won't go too deeply into the megawatts question you came up with, and likewise your final point on low emission vehicles. Point taken, yes, zero emissions are good, but I would add that, again, as with many technological things, this all changes. And so what may be relevant and useful and a great buzzword this year may have passed out of the window, and there might be something totally different we need to consider in 3, 4, 5 or 7 years' time. But all in all, thank you for your comments.
Thank you. We've got some questions coming in from Councillor Masters.
Thank you, Leader. I'll keep it brief because some of the stuff that Councillor Abbs mentioned was what I was going to talk about. But in terms of governance, and annual reporting, I think that's something that we need to focus when we come down to to the plan of action as we step away and action this strategy document. I do contend that we do need to engage more on a more regular basis with the public. The strategy consultation was comprehensive, and the public got behind it, and I think we need to work with that energy. So the governance section of the strategy document is quite broad. I think it would be important to get some more detail in that as soon as possible, given inputs and also the reporting. So that would be my points there. And yeah, I think if we can have a timetable and as to when we're formulating the plan, we need to move forward, because with COVID we have lost some time, but that we've also, with COVID, it is also an opportunity to base the recovery from COVID and frame that in a very in a green recovery, both within the community and economically as well. So I would, that's one of the things I would comment on that. But yeah, I mean, we have to get moving now, and that's vitally important. So I welcome this report coming to the executive and allowing us to move forward as soon as possible. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Masters. Councillor Ardwater, would you like to come back on some of those points?
Yeah, again, thank you again, Councillor Masters. Very briefly, absolutely, governance. Yes, we touched at a high level on governance within it. That will be materialised, and I'm sure we'll talk fairly in the near future about a regular reporting mechanism via the delivery plan, which I'm anticipating officers being ready to publish by September. So that will, that will enable us all to track progress against and to tune the targets for various projects under this strategy. And in fact, that actually, that probably relates to your second point as well about engagement. Totally accept that, yes, we need to do more of that and focus more. And again, the delivery plan and new media of explaining and articulating things, both are going to be really important in taking that forward. Finally, yes, on the timetable, absolutely, time is of the essence. I would add, though, that we've not been sitting on our hands over the last year, and as you're well aware, we're already well into the pilot phase of solar rollout. We are looking at active travel plans on the back of COVID recovery, and so and the carbon audit of the council zone operation is underway. So absolutely, yes, we do need to keep moving forward. We've not been stopping, and I'm sure you'll remind me if you feel we are delaying, but I don't think we are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ardwater. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, first of all, I just want to start off by congratulating the councillors and the officers that have been involved in the drafting of this report, and also for the launching of the community municipal investment today, which is fantastic. I think it's got many thousands worth of people in already, which is great. I was just wondering, I've got a few questions. It talks about lobbying, about planning, and we're aware that the Prime Minister has recently made some comments about changing planning regulations, and we're wondering what our plans as a council are to lobby the government to ensure that they don't bring in any planning regulations which undermine the efforts of councils to become carbon neutral. So around things like home insulation, for example. I was wondering if you could expand a bit on how we will involve farmers in this, bearing in mind we're such a rural and agricultural district. on Nature Recovery Network, it talks about leaving verges unmown more often. But I think we could probably do more on that. As the council are probably aware, the Wildlife Trust has been doing a lot of work on nature recovery networks. And I think it would be useful if we talk to them in more detail about that and how we can work with them. Obviously, we work with them very closely already on things like Green Common. So we've got a natural ally there. And I know that in Oxfordshire, they've already done a nature recovery map, which maps out all of the core and subordinate areas and how they all interrelate and how they assist with biodiversity. So I think if we could strengthen that section, it would be good. Just to follow up on what Councillor Marston said about governance, the council have decided they don't want to have a citizens' assembly, but I think some kind of working group would be good, because there are so many people across the district who would like to get involved in this. So again, Wildlife Trust, Friends of the Earth, Climate Action Network, Green Exchange, Greenfest, Lockdown Wood, etc. There's lots and lots of people who could help us with this. And these are people who will do a lot of the work for us as well. So we don't need to take on the burden of having to do everything. You know, these are doing a lot of this stuff already. So I'd be interested in the portfolio holders' thoughts on having an actual working group. And last but not least, when can the public expect to see some KPIs on this so that they can see the real meat on the bones of what's going to be happening? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Culver, and thank you for your words of congratulations. To be the first local authority to launch a climate bond, I think, is something and shows our intent. So it was nice to see you today, and thank you for those words of congratulations. Councillor Arderwater, can I hand over to you?
Yes, absolutely. And again, thank you for your congratulations, Councillor Culver. I did pick up today that, again, there's been a very, what seemed to me, a hugely encouraging start to the climate bond launch, with well over 100,000 already in the first day. So that's hugely encouraging. Going on to your other points then, in terms of lobbying and planning, absolutely, I think we all want the same thing. We want a supportive set of regulations and pressures from the government on the building industry. You will have heard, of course, the Prime Minister talk about more home insulation, and ideally we can encourage the leveraging of government enthusiasm to invest into those sort of green, helpfully ecological directions. In terms of how we can use our voice, we are very fortunate here again in having not only Laura Farris, who is on the Environment Committee, but also Alok Sharma in Reading, who is chairing the COP26 initiative for the UK. So it's a hugely high profile thing. So again, we're very fortunate having not one but two powerful voices in government. And yes, I'm very keen on us using both of those two people to bang this message home. And I know that both of them are already on side, but yes, we will continue to use not only the MPs, but contact more officer level contacts into the relevant government departments, and particularly again, absolutely around planning. In terms of farmers, I'm personally still at the learning stage, and I think we collectively all are too. I have already reached out and I'm talking with several individuals. There are some very knowledgeable, deep and clever people in the district. Again, we're very fortunate with that. And also I've already been approached by a few farmers. Obviously, there are many more who are keen to get involved and help. So again, I would welcome further contacts and networks if you're able to point people in my direction. And again, I'd hope we'd be able to find not only a set of messages and policies which we can recommend to farmers, but a way of communicating and encouraging and supporting early efforts. On Nature Recovery Network, absolutely very keen to learn more. I can't say a lot more about that, but yes, again, advice and input is welcome. And as I said previously, the strategy can only be, while it is broad and wordy, frankly, it can only touch on some of these areas. So absolutely, we do need to build on them. That then takes me along to your comments on the other organisations who may be able to help us and potentially working groups. Yes, indeed. And I'm particularly glad that there are people out there who are willing to do some of the administrative work, which otherwise would frankly overwhelm our relatively small scale in-house operation. So I'm very keen on us developing a model whereby we, the council, set up a structure, set up communications channels, and ideally delegate out not only research and information and ideas, but the assembly of those ideas into something that we and others can build on. And finally, in terms of public KPIs, yes, we will be including those in the delivery plan. And again, my hope is that that will be public by September. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arderwater. I haven't got any more hands up. So, Executive, we're being asked to approve the amended version of the Environment Strategy, which is included in Appendix G. Please, can members vote by raising their hand in favour of the proposal to approve the recommendation? So, can I see if those would like to be approved? Okay, Shiraz, I hope you've got all of those.
Yes, I did, Leader. I declare that the recommendation has been approved.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. We can therefore move forward to item 7 on our agenda this evening, which is the parking provision for electrical vehicles. And this is Councillor Sumner to introduce the report. But before he does so, does that find a seconder? Councillor Arderwater, are you seconding this report?
Apologies, Leader. Yes. Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, over to you, Councillor Sumner.
Thought I didn't have his support there for a second.
Never mind.
Don't you dare. Thank you, Leader. I am grateful to Councillor Culver, first and foremost, for raising this issue and also for attending the April Transport Advisory Group to discuss with members. I recognise that this is going to become more and more relevant as time goes by, and we see more electric vehicles on the road. The purpose of this report is to highlight the associated issues and make recommendations as to whether the motion should be implemented. The officer's report on this motion is quite lengthy, it's very detailed, but it discusses a number of the points to show that the issue isn't as straightforward as we would perhaps like to think. I believe the recommendation strikes the right balance between encouraging people to consider switching to electric cars, making provision for those that already have, and keeping sufficient parking spaces available for residents who aren't ready or able to make the switch. And I'm keen to stress the able. That's something that I do want to look into as we move forward and to engage with parties that might be able to address that. For those locations where charges are in place, frequently the frequency of the site is currently under review. And I look forward to working with officers and local ward members when the work starts in earnest on the trial site that we are proposing. I'd like to move that members support the 3 recommendations as detailed in section 2.1, that's page 125 of the papers.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. Executive members, is there anything you would like to ask or add to this? So I don't know if you want to say anything as you're seconding, Councillor Arderwater.
Yes, thank you. So yes, obviously fully support Councillor Sumner's motion, despite my earlier tardiness. I would point out just on the environmental front, which is something I think we all should bear in mind, is that over the next few years, the number of electric vehicles is going to rise significantly from its current very low level. So we do have an important balancing act to do in order to firstly encourage residents to purchase electric vehicles of all flavours, and if they are not doing so, to see the benefit in doing so. At the same time, we must be considerate to those residents who need on-road parking and frankly compete with space in some cases. So it's an important balancing act, and again, I commend this report, which has got a transition period built into it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arderwater. Members of the Executive, is there any other questions? In which case, I will go across to Councillor Apps.
Thank you, Leader. Yeah, just I'd really like the motion. I think the Dems were of a similar mind to the Greens, and I'm sure we have expounded this in the past, in that if we are going to put charging points anywhere, they need to actually be accessible to vehicles to charge from. if I can try and summarise my thinking about why I didn't think this was great just to refuse the motion, was we got a grant, and that basically allowed us to quickly put some charging points in place. It appears in retrospect that we put the wrong type of charging points in, so we went for quantity rather than quality. And having spoken to Ubitricity myself on other areas, you know, what we really should be going for here is not a test site where we may or may not get the right result. We need to actually be bolder than that and actually still allow, in the evenings, which is really the only times these slow charge points can be used, then we should be reserving them for the public to be able to do, because until people see a space in which they can put the ULEV regularly, they may not invest in that electric vehicle. So we need to build it. Okay, we've done that. We built the wrong stuff, I'd argue, but okay, we've built it. Now we need to go away and actually allow it to be used. And the experiment isn't an experimental traffic regulation order. It's really, we need people to see that the space is there and they have the incentive, therefore, to make the change. And that's the point I wanted to make. But yeah, I wish it had gone forward, this motion. Thank you.
Councillor Sumner, would you like to come back on that?
I would, Leader. I mean, I do understand the comments that Councillor Abbs has made, and I'm not sure I fully agree with all of them. I think the issue with refusal of the motion is something which has been discussed on various papers previously, and that is whether we can do all of it and do it all for the right reasons and do it all successfully. And I would question that we were able to do that. I think what we're doing is taking on board what's been said. We are looking to try and instigate that in a controlled fashion, and I don't think that's the wrong thing to do. And that is certainly the intent from me and from my officers. With regards to the wrong charging points, happy to pick that up with you offline. That's not something that I've been made aware of. And with regards to space availability, I think again we've had conversations historically about where the sort of information is available online for people to look and book, and that's out there, and I'm sure that there are references from the website to point people towards the sort of website where they can get that information, get the detail, and carry on as exactly as you're indicating. So I'm whilst I understand what's been said, I'm not in full agreement with it. But as I said, please do contact me with regards to the charging points. I'm happy to take that conversation up.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you for this report and the detailed work that went into it, and to Councillor Sumner for inviting me to the Transport Advisory Group where it was discussed. One of the things we did talk about there was whether some of the points could be moved. We're aware that there are some streets around there which are quieter. So, for example, Argyle Street. And there's also a road just around the corner from Craven Road where there are currently some of the car club parking spaces, and there's other space along there where potentially the points could be moved. So I think if we could look at that and re-examine that, that would be particularly useful. I just wondered also that with the TROs, to what extent are parish and town councils consulted about the TROs and involved in that process of discussion and decision making? And last but not least, while I appreciate that this had to go off to officers to be looked at and for them to provide their view about the practicalities, I think that there's a bigger issue that when we put forward these motions, they ought to come back to council so that we have the opportunity to have a democratic debate and a final vote on it. So that's not to undermine the officers and the hard work that's gone in and their view on whether this is a practical measure or not. But I do think from the point of view of democracy, these motions ought to come back to full council. Thank you.
Councillor Sumner.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you, Councillor Calvert. Yes, points moving, absolutely take that on board. And that's something that I've been discussing anyway with regards to Car Club, whether we've got them in the right place, whether we've got enough, whether we can expand on what we've currently got as an offering. Those conversations have started tentatively, albeit, but I'm happy to keep everybody informed on the progress that those make. It is something that I want to do. And as I said earlier, the affordability of electric cars is something that obviously everybody's acutely aware of. And until they come down to what most people would class a sensible price, we need to look at alternatives. And whether that's getting local dealers on board or whether that's expanding Car Club offerings is yet to be established. But yeah, with regards to moving points, that is absolutely a potential action. And my understanding on the technicality of the points that have been installed is that they absolutely can be moved without major upheaval. So that's something that we will be taking forward. Definitely happy to keep you involved with that one. With regards to the consultation for the TRO, I would expect that to be fairly detailed. I don't have the answer on that, and I'm happy to take that away and find out for certain for you. But certainly my expectation would be that it needs to be residents that are going to be affected in the immediate locale, but that ward members would be included in that, and that parish or town council would be involved in that conversation as well. I think that's the only way to make sure that we've got everybody's view on it. Getting something out there initially, whilst we may have been accused of putting either the wrong thing or whichever thing in the wrong place, I think was important to do. It was an important step for us to take, and I'm proud of the way that the councillors reacted to the funding that was available to do that. What we have now, I think, is some fine tweaking on that, and opening up the engagement with that is going to be key. Your final point with regards to full debate at council, that's a process matter, and I look to others to advise whether that is something that can or will be taken forward. My understanding of it was that because of the way that it moved, it was going to come to this for closure, but I don't see any reason why, if process allows it, it couldn't be open to debate. I'm totally at the hands of those that have the rule book.
I was going to say, we run a committee, an executive committee structure here, so a cabinet structure here, and the governance around this is quite clear that this is coming into an executive decision. So that's why it's come to this committee as opposed to full council. Okay, members, we have been asked to approve the recommendations as laid out in 2.1 of the paper before you this evening. Can I have a show of physical hands for all those in favour of those recommendations?
Okay. I declare that the motion is carried.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, we can now move to item 8 of the agenda, which is the 2019-20 performance report. Before I hand over, I think we've just got to welcome Councillor Stewart to her first executive this evening. This is her report, so she will be introducing it, but welcome, Councillor Stewart. Before she does so, does this report find a seconder?
If I could find the unmute button, Leader, it would do. Yes, it does.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. So I'm handing over to you, Councillor Stewart.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you for my welcome. I have attended a couple, but from the side, so it's really interesting to be here and presenting, so really exciting. The 2019-2020 Q4 performance report being brought to Executive today shows the Q4 results against measures put in place as part of the Council Strategy 2019 to 2023. The results are drawn from the individual area service plans to provide assurance to the Executive and to members that areas of significance and importance, i.e. the core business areas, are performing to the agreed standards or above. Priorities laid out in the Council strategy are being delivered against as expected, and any areas which are not performing as anticipated are flagged up at an early stage and that adequate remedial actions to improve or resolve are in place. The period covered in the report includes both pre and post COVID-19. with the lockdown announcement on the 23rd of March. And despite the full lockdown being only a few days in Q4, nevertheless, the results in some areas do in fact reflect an impact on services, which was already starting to be experienced leading up to the announcement, especially in social care for both adults and children, and also in education. And the impact of COVID-19 on the local economy is likely to become ever more evident over the next few quarters. It's really good to see strong performance has been maintained during Q4, and all but 2 of the core business targets were met or exceeded. In addition, benchmarking information confirms this council's strong position compared with other local authorities in England. In areas requiring improvement, you can see the details of remedial actions being taken in Appendix B to this report in the detailed exception reports. Some of the key call-outs for me in this report, core business activities such as we've achieved 96% against a target of 91% for maintained schools judged good or better by Ofsted. I won't go through all of them because we'll be here quite a while and we've got a lot on this agenda. Whilst it's good to see that crime figures generally have decreased over the last 3 quarters, one of the key concerns during lockdown has been whether domestic violence reports or incidents might increase. And we have seen an upward trend, which may increase further in Q1. In terms of volunteers, although we are likely to see a drop in the number of volunteers in Q1, as libraries and heritage venues, for example, were closed, this will likely be counterbalanced by the amazing response we've had across the district during the COVID crisis, with the community hub and our residents coming together, which has been so reassuring. And as part of the recovery strategy, which is coming later in this agenda, one of the aims is very much that we tap into this and encourage that continued community engagement along with regular communication to our residents. One of my favourite measures is regarding our older residents who say that West Berkshire services make them feel safe and secure, which has risen this year from 92.7% to 93.8%. And it will be really interesting to see what this looks like in Q1 and onwards, bearing in mind that a lot of our older residents may have been shielding and therefore reliant on the volunteers that we've talked about, the West Berkshire hub, as well as our communications to support them through the crisis. As we emerge from the response phase of COVID-19 and into recovery, it'll be really interesting to see what the picture looks like against these measures and targets in the coming months in West Berkshire. But we have a strong foundation to work from, and therefore I commend this report and ask members to note the results and the explanatory notes detailing where further actions are being taken in areas needing improvement. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Stewart. Members of the Executive, is there anything you would like to ask or add to?
Leader, may I start?
You may,
clearly,
Councillor
one of the clearly, I am pleased by some of the KPIs that Councillor that Joe has referred to. But one of the things I do want to draw attention to is clearly in the face of us. It's right at the start of the report, and it is the provider services issue, and which is red. The detailed analysis of that is on page 168 of the pack, and I'll refer to that basically. Now we have essentially 6 services that are looked at by CQC. 4 of those are care homes, and then we have the adult placement service and we have the home care services. Of those, 2 requires improvement, and they're both care homes, Birchwood and Walnut Close. The issue that we've had is that we were anticipating re-inspections of both those care homes, but then COVID got in the way, and clearly the CQC has stopped physically inspecting, for obvious reasons, provider services. However, what they have been doing, which is hot off the press, is they have been effectively doing a telephone management in respect of all of these services. And what they've been doing is they've been contacting the registered managers in each case and putting them through the grill as regards what is going on in that particular service. Now they can come up with 2 responses to that conversation. One is to flag up a concern, and the other is to say that they have no concern. And I spoke to Sarah Ross, who's the service manager, this afternoon, and all 6 of our services that are listed in the exception report have been shown as rated by CQC as no concern. So I'm pleased about that. I'd be very pleased when we manage to get inspections underway again and see what can be done. I mean, because I'm absolutely certain, as explained in the report, that a lot of work has been done by the service and by outside consultants in order to look at the issues here, in order to ensure that these services are not rated as requires improvement, but come back to at least good. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Joe, for the report you've introduced. I want to talk about a couple of measures that are showing red that are in my area of responsibility. First, I want to talk about the repeat referrals to children's services within 12 months of a previous referral, and there's a dialogue against that on page 169, which says that it has proved a stubborn measure to reduce, and an audit was completed and identified some recording practices. We've moved on a little bit from when this report was compiled, and I just want to bring you up to speed on where we are with this measure. The principal problem that we found referred to there as recording practices that led to incorrect counting. The principal activity or behaviour that we saw was that referrals were being passed between teams quite properly within the service, and those being passed from one to another, not that happened repeatedly, but a sensible shift of responsibility counted as a re-referral, and so that inflated the measure. And what we found since then is that, first of all, that's been addressed, but also the actual number of re-referrals has fallen quite considerably to about 15%, and that's a COVID effect. So something that we have to keep a really close eye on, because it's not necessarily addressing the problem. What we've done is after this internal audit was produced, was carried out, we've commissioned an external audit, and we're going to look really closely at every referral that we've seen to make sure that there were no underlying problems. This is an extremely difficult balancing act. If the easy way to fix re-referrals would be simply to keep the case open for as long as possible, but of course that is not a good thing for the people involved in the case. It's much better to close the case down early so that people can start to get things back to normal in their lives. So it's a very difficult balancing act, and something that our professionals struggle with all the time. The other measure I want to talk about is free school attainment by amongst our free school meal cohort. Now, back in March, the attainment gap was a subject of a strategy board, and there were 2 important strategy papers that were tabled in the strategy board to inform the debate that took place. One was the schools improvement strategy, seeking better outcomes for all learners, and the other one was an integrated early years strategy for readiness for schools. Unfortunately, the actions that we identified in the strategy board haven't been implemented, because the education service, of course, had to turn their entire focus to the fallout, the impact of schools closing. And I think one of the effects that we've seen from of COVID, something that we can anticipate, is that the attainment gap is going to increase because the disadvantaged youngsters are the people who are probably going to be affected the most in the classroom, in their development, and we need to bring about put in place a strategy that catches up the time they've lost as soon as possible. I've asked the Education Service to work closely with the schools to put in place a plan targeting complete catch-up by the end of the next academic year. And I'm really pleased that government has set out the expectation that all schools will be capable of delivering effective remote learning by the end of September. That will help our drive to catch up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Bowick. Executive, any other comments or questions before I move across to Councillor Dillon? No, Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. And thank you to Councillor Bowick and Bridgman for those in-depth commentary on those. I think the thing that shocked us most are those two key headlines, and I'm confident in Councillor Bowick's talking about the repeat referrals probably being an accountancy issue, accounting one. I wonder, is there a national standard of reporting on referrals so that we can benchmark our performance against other councils on that? But as I said, appreciate that it does seem to be an accountancy one. I think what we were really concerned about is these are, both of these are about people, and particularly young people. So, you know, whether it be in children's services or educational attainment. Now, we've known about the educational attainment gap here in West Berkshire for many years. And we know that we have pockets of deprivation. I have it in my own ward, one of the most deprived areas in West Berkshire. And it was quite clear from the very start of COVID that those children who were further behind their peers were going to be even further behind their peers when they come out of lockdown. So we will work with you and support any type of initiatives for children to be able to catch up. And I hope that we'll be using all of our lobbying to make sure that schools really do get the funding. You know, in West Berkshire, I know with the new school funding formula, we've received more money, yet we are still behind other schools within the country, and our children need those funds to help them catch up. What we do for these children in the next couple of years really does determine their life chances for the rest of their life. So we do have their futures literally in our hands at the moment. And so I just implore us to make sure that we put the full resources of the council behind that. And it comes in a bit later, Leader, into your recovery plan around how the council, for example, looks to utilise its own corporate structure and its supply chains around apprenticeships, for example, and really taking the lead and saying that as a council, those children who have finished fifth year this or next week, that if they are struggling with educational opportunities in September, of what can the council do to actually step up and walk the walk, rather than just relying on businesses to help with apprenticeships as well. Just in some general comments, because I know my individual... Shall I
let Councillor Bowick come back to you on those before you
okay.
carry on? Councillor Dillon, would that help? I mean, I can certainly come back to you on the apprenticeship, but I'm sure Councillor Bowick can.
Just to give my thanks to Councillor Dillon and his colleagues. Your support and will be greatly appreciated, and any lobbying you can do will be greatly appreciated. And you're absolutely right about the matter of the young people about to embark on their working lives, and we're working very closely with West Berkshire Training Consortium to unlock those opportunities for the young people.
Okay. Actually, we'd already invested and put forward a plan for apprenticeships for the local authority, for West Berkshire Council, and we'd had conversations around the percentage that needed to come from a disadvantaged background as well within that mix. So that is something that's very much top of our list of priorities and something that we will be focusing on going forward. So you can have assurance on that as well.
Excellent. I won't spend much longer, Leader. I know my shadows want to pick up on some general ones. I would just say that appreciate lockdown. This is a Q4 report. Lockdown started on the 23rd of March. The Prime Minister allowed Cheltenham Festival to go ahead, allowed the Liverpool football game to go ahead. So there was economic drivers happening right up until the end of Q4. Under 5.2, though, it talks about falling numbers in regards to the local economy, about more vacant businesses. And that was all prior to lockdown. And again, our challenge is going to be compounded by COVID. But we heard a lot of talk from the administration about West Berkshire being strong for business. Yet actually, as I said, these Q4 figures suggest that stuff was starting to stagnate before lockdown even. And then just because I don't have my transport portfolio holder here on a specific one, 5.10, it talks about the road targets and improvements there. And I'm afraid the reason for not hitting target is about exceptional rainfall. When we have severe winter storms every year, they cease to become exceptional. And we need to get better at either putting more money into the budget for it, or better being able to make sure that what we're laying can actually withstand the type of heavy rain that we're going to see more and more of, about future-proofing the district rather than being reactive to it. Okay, and I'll hand over to my guys for more individual specifics. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. Councillor Stewart, do you wish to come back on any of those points?
I'm just going to say I've noted them all.
Okay, thank you. If we can go therefore to Councillor Macrae.
Thank you, Leader. I'm very happy to hear the news about the care homes from Councillor Bridgman. However, I was surprised that this wasn't one of the issues covered in 4.5 on page 142, where we got particular concerns are emerging in the following areas, and that one wasn't covered. And in fact, since we had gone backwards in that we had more care homes requiring improvement, I was rather surprised at that. The other thing is on page 143, on section 5.7, it says the overall number of people receiving a long-term service for adult social care is above the Q4 position for the previous financial year. And I wondered whether this is going to cause a budget pressure in this current year, and indeed for next year. Thank you.
Councillor Bridgman.
Well, I'm not particularly going to comment on what is in 4.5 because that is the view of officers as to what they are particularly concerned about. I would simply say about these, the measures relating to care homes, of course, the issue with Birchwood has to a certain extent been long-standing. I mean, we are on an improvement path, but regrettably we haven't got to good, partially because we haven't had an inspection. I could not predict necessarily what I hope the outcome of that inspection would be good, but I can't say for certain it would be, but I am confident in the work that has been done as reflected in the table. So I'm confident in the work that's being done in that service to address the issues that have been raised by the CQC. On the subject of the number in long-term services, this is something, part of this is not predicted to be a budget pressure, and we will come on to the outcome of this financial year or the previous financial year when we come to the revenue financial performance. But firstly, the whole point of having a long-term service model is to seek to know roughly what your numbers are going to be, and therefore if you have an increase in those requiring a long-term service, one would expect that to be modelled. And we had a lengthy discussion this afternoon about modelling the demographics in the long-term service model. In fact, when we look at it, some of those numbers look a little up and down, and I've asked officers to clarify some of the numbers, because I'm not overly clear on why there have been quite considerable fluctuations in 2019-20 quarter 2 to quarter 3 numbers. I've got the numbers here if anyone is sad enough to want me to read them out. But there was a large fluctuation in those numbers, and I want to understand what's going on behind those numbers. So in answer to your question, I do not think that this will flow through to a budget issue. That's the whole point of the model, and we can discuss that in some more depth when we come on to the performance piece. And any fluctuation in the number is to some extent anticipated. We are indeed anticipating, and to some extent this was pre-COVID prediction, a fairly considerable increase in the long-term service number over the next 2 financial years, which is how far out we're predicting. So at the moment in the model, there's a 5% increase year on year. Now, that needs testing, and I want to understand a lot more about the model and what we really are predicting. So work is being done, and obviously that will come through the process as we get to it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you, Leader. Luckily for you all, Councillor Dillon has stolen most of my details.
Okay, well, we don't need a repeat.
Already, but don't worry, I've managed to find a few other comments that I wanted to make, if that's all right. Firstly, a few detailed things. I wonder if you could confirm that on pages 170, 174 and 175, the dates in the tables are not correct, and that if so, whether you'd be able to reissue those, please.
Carry on, because I think Councillor Stewart's looking at them. Or are you able to go with that, Councillor Stewart?
I will certainly take those back and check those out, and we'll make sure that they're amended if they're incorrect.
Thank you. They seem to be showing previous years rather than the current year.
Right. Okay.
So yes, I also welcome the efforts of the Education Department to address the issues of attainment for foundation stage and also key stage 4. But what does strike me is that, having been a councillor for a year, I've heard a lot from the executive about strategic plans to reduce the attainment gap over the last year. But as you can see from page 170, you know, we're at the bottom of the 4th quartile there. And we've been at the bottom of the 4th quartile for not just this year, but for previous years as well. And the situation for key stage 4 is also pretty poor. You know, there we've gone from the 3rd quartile to the 4th quartile, so also not good. You know, we're getting the impression that this needs a lot more effort and focus than it's currently had. So, you know, I know that there is a strategic objective to support everyone to reach their full potential. You know, currently it really appears to me that that's not happening.
Councillor Burke, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, thank you, Leader. Pains me to say that I agree with you, Councillor Pattenden. It is an extremely difficult challenge that we have. It's why we've made it one of our strategic imperatives. It's something that we said when we went into the elections in May, that this is of last year, this is something we wanted to address in the new administration. That was the reason why we came to, we involved members in a strategy board in March. We need to put in place actions to address the gap. The gap which is widening as we watch, the gap which is going to be even harder to bridge. And I do hope, well, Councillor Dillon has committed the assistance of all of you to help us close that gap.
Thank you, Councillor Burt. I'm just going to add there, because I've probably had most insight over this over the last few years, to say there isn't a silver bullet here. And I think we involved Councillor Dillon in the previous shadow portfolio home, taking them through all of the initiatives that we have done here in West Berkshire. What's become more and more apparent to me is this is not an educational issue. This is an inequalities issue. And for me, the key area that we have to focus on is through our Health and Wellbeing Board and addressing some of the inequalities. Education alone cannot fix this. So it is a priority within the Health and Wellbeing Board strategy that they are looking at the whole inequalities piece, because I think it needs health, it needs housing, it needs so many different departments to come together, to work together to actually solve this. So I appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Patton, about the actual results. However, that's easy to say with schools, because they are trying their hardest. They've tried so many different things to address this, but this is about inequalities and how we can address. We're very fortunate here in West Berkshire that we have so many good outcomes, and we have a generally good outcomes for our children and our young people and our health and our education. And what happens is that is more and more pronounced when you have those inequalities. So just as Councillor Dillon mentioned, you know, we know about where those areas of deprivation are. How we tackle them is the challenge. So we fully accept that challenge. And because we fully accept it, we have left this measure here so that every time it comes up, you can have a go at us about it. The easier thing would have been to not have this measure here, but we don't believe that's the right thing. We have to all stay focused on this. And certainly that is why we made Making Full Potential a key strategy for improvement going forward. So just to echo our commitments on this. I've got Councillor Brooks next.
Thank you, Leader. This is probably to Councillor Stewart, and I hope I get a bit more than noted as a response, but we'll see. COVID in Q1, Q2, and the rest of this financial municipal year and into the future is going to have a huge impact. We know that, Q1 particularly. But I'm uncomfortable to read in 5.21 on page 150, measures were being developed following the completion of the economic development strategy. However, staff in this area were redeployed to work on the COVID-19 response. When were they redeployed? Because actually the COVID impact started hitting the middle of March onwards. And furthermore, on 5.22, due to COVID-19, work on superfast broadband installation has been delayed, and it was not possible for the contractors to continue their activity during the lockdown period. The lockdown period happened in the last 2 weeks of this quarter under review. This is really using COVID, or might be seen as using COVID, to explain drift and delay. So let's not fall into that trap, please, because it will be found out. My other point is on 5.27 and the accompanying table on page 152 in terms of sickness and absence. We do seem a little bit worse than other local authorities. Have a look at the table. In most of the last 5 or 6 quarters, we look a little bit worse than other local authorities. And sickness is often a barometer of the feeling of morale and well-being of staff. So although it's not high, Leader, it's higher than our peer groups. And I think that needs some consideration. 2 points then, please.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Councillor Stewart, do you wish to come back on those?
Yes, certainly. So I take your points on board, and I won't just say they're noted. Thank you, Councillor Brooks. I agree with you. I've actually had a couple of sessions with the programme manager for the superfast broadband, because we have picked up other areas in reporting where we were concerned that COVID was being used as a reason for things to be delayed. As I understand it, and I hope you will forgive me because I am new to the aspect of superfast broadband, I must say. So I'm working with the programme leader to really understand what the pressures are on that programme and how exactly anything could be allowed to drift. And I believe there are a number of different aspects that can cause something to drift like that, which are not necessarily within our control. So, for example, way leaves, and that is mentioned in this report, in particular, where you have, and I won't mention the particular department in the government that seems to be more difficult to get way leave agreements through, but there are some in where we haven't been able to progress them. The providers haven't been able to progress because those way leaves have not been very quickly put in place. So that's one thing that certainly the programme manager is battling with. I also know that there was some remedial action that had to take place with regards to some of the previous work that had been done. So that also has been picked up. And actually, I can say that COVID was an issue for some of that time because providers were concerned about coming to homes and properties and beginning work when actually the emerging situation around COVID was uncertain, I think, is probably at that point. So I do take your point. I don't like drift either. I will continue to work with the programme manager on the superfast broadband just to make sure that it doesn't continue.
Okay, I'm going to take Councillor Sumner as the last question on this because I think we've had quite a good and thorough debate here and I want to move the agenda on this evening. So Councillor Sumner for the last question, please.
Thank you, Leader. It was more of an observation of a comment that Councillor Dillon made with regards to 5.10 and the condition of the roads. I hear what you're saying. I think my observation would be that, yes, whilst we get quite a lot of rainfall every year, I think everybody would accept that the amount of flooding that was in place, certainly for the period that's being looked at, was considerable this year and not necessarily experienced every year. That said, I think the issue then falls into drainage, and that's why, with regards to the budget setting meeting that we had, there was a focus at that point on how we can address that, how we can improve the drainage, and I'm working on a basis that there's a direct correlation between the two. I don't have the detail, but I'm happy to look into that a little bit further with officers. But if we can address the drainage problems, then my view is we manage the deterioration problems. What I'd also say finally is that looking at page 144, maintaining our roads, the percentage of principal road network in need of repair was favourable. It was 2% against a target of 4%. So there clearly is some really, really good work being done out there, irrespective of the position that you painted earlier on. As I said, if there are specifics, I'm happy to pick those up either with you or to speak with officers and try to work out whether there is a direct correlation between the principal roads and the roads that we're talking about for deterioration and the roads where there may have been drainage problems experienced.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. So we have had a good debate on this. I can see other hands going on, but I'm keen to move the agenda on. I think if there's any particular questions that you feel unanswered, please do email Councillor Stewart and she'll be able to give you a direct answer to those. Okay, members, we have a recommendation in front of us, which has had a founder seconder. So as laid out in 2.1, to note progress and achievements, 2.2, to review the appropriateness, and 2.3. Please can members vote by raising their actual hand in favour of the proposals to approve the recommendation.
Thank you, Leader. I declare that the recommendations have been approved.
Thank you, everybody. Okay, we now move on to item 9 on our agenda this evening, which is the West Berkshire Recovery Strategy. And this has actually got my name on it, so I'm going to be introducing the report. Before I do so, does this find a seconder?
And this time I've unmuted myself, Leader, so yes, it does.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. We know that many people living in West Berkshire will have been either directly or indirectly impacted by COVID-19. There is much discussion about what these impacts may be, whether that be from a health perspective, where there is still much to learn about the disease itself and one's road to recovery from it, to the impact on our businesses and our employment opportunities going forward, the potential for a green renewal, the inequality of impact on particular groups, the future of our children and young people. The strategy I'm presenting to you this evening is to provide a framework for us here in West Berkshire to focus our recovery journey on, and the actions we need to take to support our residents on this journey over the coming months. Before I talk about the details of this, I would like to put this strategy into context. We know that there will be recovery plans at both a national level and at a regional level, so our focus is local. What is it here in West Berkshire that we can do? What are our specific needs? We also know in terms of timing that we are still responding to COVID, and therefore the impacts are still not fully known. As more evidence is gathered, we will know more about the areas we need to support. However, we wanted to be proactive in bringing forward this strategy, believing the sooner that we start this work, the more prepared we will be, but acknowledging this is not a complete delivery plan. It will need further partner engagement to shape and form this work, but as many of you have heard me say before, I would want to develop this with our communities and partners, rather than attempting to do it for them or to them. We have, however, been able to identify 3 core areas for our initial focus: health, education, and our economy. The 3 areas that I believe are fundamental to making West Berkshire a great place to live. And we have agreed our core principles guiding our work. 2 in particular I would like to highlight to you. The first, recognising that pre-COVID, we had a range of good outcomes already here in West Berkshire, and we will want to see a return to this position. The second being that during our response to COVID, there have been some changes that we would want to keep and build on. We want to seize the positive. Before I go to Appendix E, those of you that are eagle-eyed will notice on page 185, the front page for the strategy, it actually says the strategy is not for publication externally. This is because it's taken from a previous version, so of course this is for publication, so apologies for that. And I'm saying it before Councillor Bridgman does, because I'm sure he will have noticed it. Appendix E sets out some of the steps we have already taken and those in the pipeline at present. The list is by no means complete and will evolve over the coming weeks. Our next steps are detailed in 7.2 of the report, page 202 of your pack. And I hope this evening that you will approve this strategy, but I'm more than happy to take any questions that you might have on it. Councillor Bridgman, is there anything you would like to add to what I've said at this point?
Not particularly. I do, I mean, there have been discussions. Indeed, I was in a fairly lengthy discussion this morning on the Locality Integration Board about what we are doing going forward and what, for example, Wokingham is doing going forward. And one piece I just would like, I think I may have said this publicly before, but if I haven't, I definitely want to. I want to congratulate everyone who's been involved in the Community Hub, because that piece of work has been, I think, a fantastic success. And going forward with recovery, using our volunteers and involving our volunteers is going to be beneficial to everyone. And I want to warmly congratulate all of the volunteer groups across the district and the staff of West Berkshire Council for the serious amount of effort that's been put in relation to COVID as a, if I can call it, a piece of work in relation to council business. I cannot speak more highly than anything of our staff, and I really want to take a public opportunity to congratulate them. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Members of the Executive, is there any questions you would like before I go across the room? I can't see any hands raised. I'll go across to Councillor Abbs then.
Thank you very much, Leader. You may remember I dropped a note to yourself and the CEO of Nick Carter on Monday related to this, and as the PM has now actually come around to what I've been suggesting for some time, that wearing masks inside offices and general availability of this type of stuff to build confidence in shoppers is actually a good idea. It's been a long time coming. I'm just wondering, as part of this recovery scheme, are we now going to see West Berkshire adopt some of what I was proposing in terms of, making some of this needed equipment available via the council, so that those who can't afford it themselves actually have the confidence to obtain what they need and get out there and actually spend what they have. Because unless we get people back and doing what they did before, we will not be recovering.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Abbs. Throughout our response to COVID, we have been very clear that we have followed government guidance and Public Health England guidance. The current guidance is changing the legislation around face masks in shops from the 24th of July, and we will be promoting that and encouraging people to take part in that exercise. So we have followed government guidance throughout, and we will continue to do so. With regards to access to PPE, we have been working very closely with Green and Common Trust, and they have, we've talked to them about PPE issues, and they've made very clear that they're working with charities across the area and that they will be able to provide support should anybody not be able to get that support themselves. So that has been already discussed previously with Green and Common Trust, and is still the situation as far as I'm concerned. Councillor Dillon.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I think the three broad: education, health, and the economy are as strategic objectives to focus on in the recovery. The right top levels. I don't mean this in any disrespect, Lynn. It's a very wordy document, which more tells a narrative of what's happened rather than a strategy going forward. And I again take it on face value that actually the devil will be in the detailed delivery plans around all of that. So, okay, it's right that you set out education here today as a priority, but I think that more specific comments will come through those detailed delivery plans. And I think our view, particularly around the economic or the economy, is what can the council do with its own purchasing power to be able to help support businesses, particularly around that PPE and getting that sense of confidence back, because without the confidence, the economy won't recover, particularly that hospitality sector.
Okay, and I make no apologies for that, Councillor Dillon. As I said at the start, we know that we're trying to be proactive here. There are a list of actions that we've already taken. So if you take the education piece, we've done quite a lot of work around making sure that our disadvantaged children have laptops in their schools, looking at what the summer programme might look like. So there's actions in play. Why the document is set out as it is we recognise that we can't do this alone. We're going to have to do this in partnership. So we're going to have the right people in the room. So it is a strategy, and I make no apologies for it not being a completed delivery plan for the very reasons I set out at the start. I don't think we should be trying to do this to people. We have to work with both our residents, our partners, our stakeholders, so that the things that we implement are welcome and sustainable, as opposed to what we think they might need. So for that very reason is why it's set out as it is. I
wasn't criticising it, Lynn. I was just saying, we appreciate that the devil will be in those detailed delivery plans for us to comment on.
And what's really exciting, it's not the right term here, we're talking about recovery. What I think is going to be really good is when we get into those stakeholder engagement pieces where we're actually directly having those conversations. So you mentioned economic development. We had a really good economic development session with the EDC, which we've invested in and we're taking part in as part of our process, where we had about 110 businesses, which we were hearing directly what is it they need. So it's them telling us what they need, and PPE wasn't listed as something they needed. What they were talking about were other things. It's what can we do with them and how can we help them. So I think that's going to really start to put the meat on the bones. But this I recommend to you tonight as a good strategy that embraces that way of working. Councillor Culver.
Thank you, Leader. Just want to take this opportunity to congratulate all of the local community volunteers and also the hub and the council officers. I had a lot of contact with the council officers and they were extremely helpful, so I'm very grateful for that. Thanks also, Leader, for taking on board the comments that I emailed to you. So, for example, making sure that district councillors are included in the list of people who are involved in this, because obviously we know our wards very well. We know the different villages and the community volunteer coordinators, etc. Just a couple of things. You mentioned a COVID community group survey, and I have discovered today that a couple of the local coordinators didn't receive that. So I think there's still some work to be done to make sure everyone's joined up. But obviously that is really complex because of the amount.
I was going to say on that particular one, if you could feed it into the hub, because the hub will work with the voluntary sector. If somebody's been missed, let us know, Councillor Culver.
Yeah, thank you, will do. Something that I think I've mentioned before, the leaflet that went round very early in the crisis didn't get to a lot of people, including people in urban built up areas. And I know that a private company was employed to do that. And I fed back to the officers streets that weren't getting done. I think from a value for money taxpayers point of view, maybe in the future, if we could involve the district councillors, because the district councillors know their areas quite well and might be able to help get some volunteers to actually do it and save money.
Well, what we've actually looked at is our resident survey told us about 72% of people had an awareness of that leaflet and the hub. So we know that there's work to be done. We're actually in the process, because of our local outbreak engagement plans, of going to do another leaflet out, which will be royal mailed to every house so that no house gets missed. And we've decided that's the safest way forward for that, Councillor Culver.
Okay. And then a couple of final things, sorry. Will you be working with 8 Bells for Community Strength, who work with isolated individuals? Because it would seem that if the hub and that organisation work together, they might be able to do some good work together.
We've listed all of the partnerships that are involved on the Health and Wellbeing Board, and I believe they're represented through the voluntary sector. So yes, we will be looking at engaging all of those partners to have a conversation around how best to do this going forward. That's what I'm saying. We haven't got all of the answers at this point. We need to have that level of conversation and engagement.
Okay, great. But last but not least, is there an update on Northbrook Street being pedestrianised? I think you were going to review it every month. Do you know when exactly that's going to happen and what your views are about whether it should continue?
We had an economic development board this morning. We're having this conversation around the number of licenses that have been taken up versus at what point would it be wise to do a study of those individual businesses, because obviously, like everything, the licenses only just came in, so you need to give those businesses the opportunity to utilise them. If they're not being utilised, then we need to look at whether that's the right thing to do. So we are reviewing it as we speak, and we will keep that under review throughout. And I know that was actually an action that was taken away from the Economic Development Board this morning.
Thank you.
Councillor Macro.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, in section 4.8, the second to last sentence, it says public health advocating for a regional testing station to be established in West Berkshire or Reading in the coming weeks. Now, I believe that we do actually have one established now at the Showground.
Yes.
But there's a big
As you can appreciate, there's been a few different drafts of this, and it was started beforehand. So yes, we have got our own testing centre. Well, it's not our own; it's regional.
There's one big problem with that location, of course, which is you can't get there by public transport. And I think we should be doing all we can to make sure that anybody who has symptoms can get tested and get tested quickly. So could I ask perhaps that that location be rethought to be somewhere which can be reached by public transport?
We also have the mobile testing units, which tend to be more in urban settings, Councillor Macro, and I believe the community hospital still has some testing. I think what's quite interesting with this is how they operate, because if you've been across to Newbury Showground, you'll see as you go in that drivers are recommended to keep their windows up, because obviously there's personnel on site, and it's how it is operated as a car drive-through version, and we have to recognise that it's operating across the region. And actually being at the crossroads of the A34 and the M4 is an ideal location for many people across the region. But we will be making sure that we have the mobile testing units that go into more urban areas and keeping people informed and giving the support where we need to.
If we can keep people informed, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Sumner.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Just a very large note of caution about anybody that thinks they have COVID going on public transport. I thought that was an absolute no-no.
And that's a very good point as well. Okay.
What are people supposed to do then, Leader, if they don't have access to
well, I believe that there are opportunities to have home testing kits as well. So I think when you actually ring that number, there are a number of options that are taken into account as to how best to get you tested.
Yes, we know there's lots of delays with that too.
We haven't had any delays here, and I think I think I was talking to someone we've sort of been turning around in 24 hours. But if you want further details, I suggest we can get, well, actually, Matt Pearce, our head of public health, has been doing regular member updates. So, have a conversation with him. But as far as I'm aware, that it's been working very well and actually is under capacity. So we would encourage people to make sure that if they're suspected COVID, that they're following the processes that we've been widely publicising at this point. Okay, members, the recommendation is that we adopt the recovery strategy this evening. The proposals are to approve the strategy. Please can members vote by raising their hand in favour of the proposals for the recommendation.
Thank you, Leader. I declare that the recommendation has been approved.
Thank you. We can therefore move forward to item 10 of our agenda, which is the 2019-20 Revenue Financial Performance Provisional Outturn Report. I'm going to go to Councillor McKinnon to introduce the report, but before I do so, I'm just going to say that I'm very happy to second this from the Chair. Councillor McKinnon.
Thank you very much, Leader. Yes, hello everyone. So this report's, the recommendation is a simple one. It's simply to note the provisional outturn position. So an outturn gives us here an opportunity to see how closely the Council achieved or didn't achieve its revenue budget for 2019 to 2020. And I'm in a somewhat unusual position, I think, in recent years of reporting an underspend of just under £1.5 million. Now, there's two ways of looking at this. I mean, an underspend is better than overspend. And it provides us with a positive effect, a positive impact on reserves going into 2020-21, which, as we all know, is shaping up to be a rather financially challenging year. On the other hand, ideally, we wouldn't have an underspend or an overspend at all, and we'd be looking at hitting our budget bang on. Of course, it's never possible to hit it exactly bang on. But let me tell everyone where the underspend comes from. Just in the executive summary of this report, we can see that the main driver of the underspend is the People Directorate. Okay, so a £2 million underspend in the People Directorate, again driven mainly by adult social care. Now, again, Councillor Bridgman may well choose to talk about that shortly. Yes, an underspend sounds good. I think he and I would rather that we hit the budget exactly, but would I rather have an underspend than an overspend? Absolutely yes, for obvious reasons. Also in that People Directorate, we have Children and Family Services with 435,000 underspend as well, mainly from childcare lawyers, savings and childcare lawyers. We have the Education Service with a 200,000 underspend, but the main driver, adult social care, as it always seems to be with these outturns, whether it's an under or an overspend. Offsetting that is in Place Directorate, a 449,000 overspend, mainly due to a reduction in planning income from planning applications. Also, car parking income was negatively impacted from the closure of the Market Street car park for a time. And then in the Resources Directorate, the relatively small overspend coming really from the fact that the 100 million property investment has not been fully invested. It's sitting there at 62, 63. So we've got a corresponding knock-on effect in income not being achieved there. So an underspend, a positive impact for reserves and our financial position going into 2021. And well, I propose the recommendation be accepted.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. I'm very happy to second this. I think for me, the recent peer review of West Berkshire Council talked about our sound financial management, and I know Councillor Bridgman will want to come in and talk about the underspend, and I think the modelling that's been used and the ability of us to actually invest in the areas that previously for many, many years have been underfunded has been a real strength. And actually the sound financial management that has enabled this has actually supported us a lot over the recent months where we've been managing with the COVID crisis and the extra pressure that's put on. So I'm very happy to second this, but I know that Councillor Bridgman's keen to come in because of that to talk to us about the ASC underspend.
Yes, thank you, Leader. Yeah, and as Councillor McKinnon quite rightly says, I would prefer any budget, and given that this is my portfolio, the adult social care budget, to come home on the nail. But that is never going to happen. And as Councillor McKinnon says, I would far prefer to have an underspend than an overspend. And let's also put an underspend into context. I mean, we've got, I think, roughly a 1.7 million underspend out of adult social care, as against, if you recall, looking back to March when we set the budget, we put, I think, another 3.2 million into the adult social care budget from previous year. So you have to weigh up one against t'other. One element of the underspend is a sad reflection. It is an increased number of deaths in our client base. And this is pre-COVID, and certainly looking at the numbers going forward, as I've anticipated in my response to Councillor Macro about the numbers of long-term service clients, that is likely to continue to be a challenge in our prediction of how many long-term service clients we will have over time, and therefore working the model going forward is going to be a challenge. But a number of other elements of the underspend I want to applaud adult social care staff on. Procurement of packages has the team that do the procurement have quite properly protected council taxpayers' money and got good deals. The members will probably remember a conversation that we had about the introduction of an approved providers list in relation to domiciliary care. That has certainly proved to be worthwhile by putting packages of dom care together and reducing the number of suppliers that we had to deal with. We have made savings in that area. And every time we make a saving in adult social care, it is definitely not to the disadvantage of our clientele. We have we have Care Act responsibilities to the people that we serve and we provide services to, and we provide packages of care to. And I am satisfied that those packages have not been not deteriorated as a result of any of this saving. Another piece where we have had some success, and indeed one of the early government moves in relation to this in the COVID piece, which will come through in next year's numbers, is in relation to the relationship with the CQC, in the relationship with the CCG, the commissioning part of the health service, and in relation to continuing healthcare. And we have had some success in persuading the CCG that packages should be paid for because they are effectively national health service packages rather than social care packages, should be paid for by them and not by us. So I'm pleased about that. We've also done some good work in reablement, reducing a spend in reablement by reducing the amount of time someone has to be subject to reablement is not only good for our budget, it is good for the individual because they spend less time in the system. So I could go through a whole load of other bits and pieces that are buried in these numbers. But in essence, you know, given that adult social care spends something like 38% of the council's money, it isn't wholly surprising that when you have a fluctuation in the budget, it looks like a fairly big number. We are not complacent. I've spoken about the model. I am going to be working with officers on that model. We want to make it improved as we go forward. But as Councillor McKinnon says, I'm far happier with an underspend than I would be with having to explain an overspend again. Thank you, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman, for that very thorough response there. So that's very much appreciated. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Leader. You'd expect me to grumble if there was an overspend. I'll have a little grumble that there is an underspend of nearly 1.5 million, because that is probably 1.5% on council tax. And when you take more money than you need, it's people's money at home that you've taken. Now, you'll probably riposte with it's only 1.7% or whatever it is in the whole total budget, but to the residents, it's still 1.5 million quid. So I make the point, but now I'm going to say something more emollient, I think. Councillor McKinnon has a pretty tough job, and so do all of the portfolio holders, because what you can normally do in a budget is look at the 3-year trend and then project it forward, but you can't this year, can you? Because all bets are off. We now have the pandemic, and the budget really wasn't planned for with a pandemic in mind. Obviously it wasn't at national level. So you have a tough thing to do now, because, as I say, you can't look at trend and say that's how things might well pan out. So I hope those, acknowledging words are helpful to Councillor McKinnon. But as I say, I'm still having a little grumble that we have £1.5 million more than we needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. Councillor McKinnon, do you want to respond to Councillor Brooks?
Yeah, just to the first half. To the second half, I'll say thank you for those warm words. And of course, yes, I take the point about taking more money than you need. I mean, the benefit of 50-50 hindsight would have been wonderful. But of course, there is a potential knock-on effect in future years. But yeah, thanks for those sentiments, Councillor Brooks.
Thank you. Councillor Pattenden.
Thank you, Leader. I'm looking at the paragraph 4.5 and the underspend of 179,000. And I'm wondering, this is probably a question to the portfolio holder, what the impact of that might have been to people that might have wanted to take advantage of that service.
Councillor Bowick, are you able to come back on that?
Really, the impact is caused by people not bringing cases that required legal intervention. So there was less demand on the service.
Thank you, Councillor Bowick. Councillor Dillon.
Thank you, Leader. Just on the 1.5 million, at council previously, we've seen the local council tax support scheme being reduced when the council was under some financial pressure, and we spoke, I think, either at full council or the last exec, that those households obviously could be doubly impacted by COVID and struggling to recover financially. So a plea from us that setting the budget is to look at the local council tax support grant scheme and do as much as you can for those poorer households in West Berkshire when setting the next budget.
Thank you, Councillor Dillon. Councillor McKinnon, do you wish to come back on that?
Yeah, I would just say that when we do our budget setting process, we absolutely consider all households in West Berkshire, including those who are disadvantaged and those who are poorest. So I can give them that assurance.
Thank you. Okay, members, the recommendation is to note the provisional outturn position of 1.46 million underspend. Can I see a show of hands for, actually, I don't think I need a show of hands, do I? Because it's just to note. Is that right?
Yes,
thank
that's
you. So
right.
we don't even have to have a show of hands. So, sorry, thank you. Okay, we can move on to item 11 then, and that's the Capital Financial Performance Report outturn. We have got Councillor McKinnon to introduce this report. Does this report find a seconder from the executive?
Yes, I'm happy to second this, Leader.
Thank you, Councillor Bowick. Over to you, Councillor McKinnon.
Thanks very much, Leader. Yes, me again, everyone, and it's the capital outturn and another underspend. Okay, so in 2019 to 2020, our capital budget, as revised, was 91.9 million. And we have a rather large looking underspend, 52.4 million. So I think I need to take everyone through just what makes up that underspend. 35 million of it can be explained with our commercial property portfolio. So the Property Investment Board was authorised to spend up to £100 million in commercial property. The achievement of that £100 million spend was expected in the original 1920 capital budget. So we had another 35 million or so to go. Full Council has discussed, and everyone I think in this virtual room is aware of the reasons why we had to pause our commercial property investment. A change in the SIPFA guidance being the principal one. So the original capital programme had the expectation of us spending the extra 35 million, which obviously hasn't happened. So out of that 52 million, 35 is from PIB, from Property Investment Board, which leaves about 17 million to be explained away elsewhere. And just looking at, again, I'll break it down by directorate with a brief explanation of each one. The People Directorate is about 4.6 million underspend. That's from slight delays to educational projects, schools like Highwoods Copse and Speenhamland and the Willig. The Place Directorate, 9.7 million. Transports projects, again, being delayed there, as well as the delay to our solar PV installations. This is, remember, is back in 1920, not right now. Obviously, today we've had the happy launch of the bond. And just once I've finished this explanation, I'm going to give everyone, just if you'll forgive me, Leader, a bit of an update as to the uptake of that bond. Yeah, so the Place Directorate, 9.7 million. And then the Resources Directorate, 3 million underspend, a delay to the rollout of the superfast broadband, which there's been generating a bit of interest on the chat box there amongst colleagues. So those are our directorate underspends. Again, it's an underspend rather than overspend. And all of those projects that have been delayed are reprofiled into this year. So they're not projects that have fallen by the wayside. They're going to be part of the capital programme going forward from this year. So that is our the first recommendation on this report, is to note the capital outturn. There is a second recommendation in this paper, which is to amend the 2020-21 capital programme. There's the addition of a £909,000 item. This relates to the upgrade of the Care Director software package, which is used in the Adult Social Care and Children and Family Services Directorate. The upgrade was not originally anticipated in the capital programme for 2020-21. It's been a recent development. So there is a second recommendation in the paper for that. So those are the two recommendations which I would propose are accepted by this executive committee. And just before I give way, I can tell you that the climate bond, as of 4:45 this evening, £165,000 have been raised out of the, remember that's a maximum of 1 million there. From chatting to the guys who help us out here at Abundance, unofficially, people in the know would say, well, roughly 10% of these, that'd be a good result, raising 10% on the first day. Well, we've got 16.5 on the first day, and it's open for another couple of months. So I think I'm delighted. I know everybody else is who was at the photo shoot. Lee, you're saying how many investors? I don't know how many individuals actually at the moment, but yeah, there was a mixture of large and small investments. I know that. So yeah, it's been really, really heartening. It's the first one in the UK. I know it's not directly linked to the capital outturn, but I think, Leader, the capital programme is funded by borrowing, isn't it? And we've got our solar
Councillor
PV.
McKinnon.
So
You've had your opportunity.
There we go.
Okay, members of the executive, does anyone have any questions around the capital programme for Councillor McKinnon? No? Any other questions on the capital programme from anybody? Oh, Councillor Pattenden, I thought we were going to get a clean sweep there.
Afraid not. Yeah, just looking at 5.6C, the underspend for the education services projects, but possibly again a question for the portfolio holder. I mean, we know about Highwood Copse, but I'm just wondering what the impact of all of those, or those different projects, is on the children. You know, there's some people would have been relying on a lot of those things. They may well feel quite disappointed that they're not going ahead as they previously thought.
Councillor Bowick.
Yes, not all of those projects, of course, because the Eastern Area PRU is not providing school places for people for children in the sense that you mean. But certainly, I think the project which has had the biggest impact on school places has been Highwood Copse, and it's very disappointing for us to have to go back to parents and tell them that the school they were hoping to send their children to is not available for reasons beyond our control. But I'm happy to say that, that we did very well in the as well as we always do in our school allocations this year. And although parents may have been disappointed, they will have their children are going to a school of their choice.
Thank you, Councillor Berwick. I have no other hands raised, and therefore on this one, I do have a recommendation. It's laid out in 2.1 and 2.2. One is on the capital provision outturn, but the second one is on this members agree to the new 909k capital budget. Members, can I see a show of physical hands for all those that are happy to accept the recommendations as laid out before you?
Thank you, Leader. I declare that the recommendations have been approved.
Thank you. Okay, we move forward then to item 12 on our agenda this evening, which is the future arrangements for the provision of public health across West Berkshire, Wokingham and Reading. Councillor Wollaston, I believe you're going to introduce this report, but before you do so, does this report find a seconder? Councillor McKinnon, are you seconding this report?
Yes, I am, Leader. Apologies. I'm happy to second this report.
Thank you. Over to you, Councillor Wollaston.
Right, for a moment. This is a review of the running of the public health provision across West Berkshire. Since 2013, we've had a single director of public health for all 6 unitaries in Berkshire. This is in fact unique for the whole of the UK. A review was undertaken by the 6 chief executives in 2019. And the conclusion was it is too large a job for one person. And helpfully, the current incumbent is leaving next month. The role needs to be split in 2. So we will have a shared director of public health for Berkshire West, let's say West Berkshire, Reading and Wokingham, who will work with the Berkshire West Integrated Care Partnership. This should lead to improved health of the population and reduce inequalities, which has been raised earlier this evening. There is a cost implication of between 75,000 and 100,000 to West Berkshire, but the underlying current structure is frankly unstable, and I commend this proposal for the good of the public health, and the cost will be covered through the enhanced 2020-2021 public health grant.
Thank you, Councillor Wollaston. Councillor Bridgman.
Thank you, Leader. I was simply going to say that at the Locality Integration Board meeting this morning that I have previously referred to, there's a clear desire to improve and build on the relationships between the NHS and local government. And anything that we do that improves that relationship and that working together is to be encouraged, and I'm very supportive of this move because I do think that it will promote the health agenda in the Berkshire West CCG and move things forward.
Thank you, Councillor Bridgman. Any other questions from the executive? No, in which case can I go across to Councillor Macro?
Thank you, Leader. So I understand the reasons for this, and I think I think they're probably pretty good ones. The one thing I'm worried about, though, is the budgetary cost. It's all very well saying it's going to come out of the ring-fence budget, but that implies that our budget is that less of that budget is going to be available for other things. So what I'm asking is, this going to lead to budget pressures elsewhere?
I'm hopeful rather than not. But I think what we're producing is a much better service for West Berkshire, and we ought to need to look at it in that light.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? In which case we need, we have a recommendation as laid out in 2.1 to dissolve the current arrangement, and 2.2 to create a shared director of public health. Can I see a show of physical hands for all those in favour of accepting the recommendations?
Thank you, Leader. I declare that the recommendations have been approved.
Thank you. We can now move to item 13 on our agenda this evening. Now, I believe we are able to physically share the members' questions that have been submitted. Yes, here they come, so that everybody who is watching this can see these. So we've got an hour for members' questions, and what I tend to do is take one person at a time so everybody gets a fair share and rotate. However, the first 3 questions on our agenda this evening are from Councillor Culver for Councillor Cole, and unfortunately, due to personal reasons, Councillor Cole has had to give her apologies this evening. So what we will be doing for Councillor Cole's questions is to provide
Leader, could I just I apologise for a point of order for interrupting. I have just read that question, and it's addressed to me, and definitely it wasn't addressed to me when we first looked at these. Something's gone wrong with the labelling on these.
Okay, yes. Clark, can you help me out here?
I'm going to apologise at the that's incorrect. I can only assume that's from a previous template, and that part hasn't been changed. So I can only apologise for that.
So can we just be clear? Is this question for Councillor Cole?
Indeed, yeah. All the questions A, B, and C from Councillor Cole are all to Councillor Cole.
Okay.
I'm sure Graham can answer them.
Apologies for that, everybody. And Councillor Culver, what we will do is we'll provide you a written response for Councillor Cole's questions, and they will be visible within the minutes of this meeting so that everybody has the opportunity to do that. So that is questions A, B, and C. So if you want to run through those, Stephen. Hang on, do you want to go back so people can just have a chance to read them?
Apologise.
Yeah, so that everybody can see what Councillor Culver has submitted and will be getting a written answer for. Okay, if you can go on from there.
Leader, can I just ask what timescale I can expect to get the answers in?
I believe it's already written, so I don't see that there's going to be any particular issue with getting that to you as soon as possible. Is that right, Stephen?
Yeah, within the, yeah, I think we're committed to the next within the next week, the next 5 working days.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, it's very unusual for Councillor Cole not to be with us. Okay, which case we move on to question D, which was submitted by Councillor Abbs and is actually a question for myself. If you just bear with me one moment. Councillor Abbs, I truly want to thank you for your question, as it gives me the opportunity to set the record straight and myth bust this notion that we've attempted in any way that democracy needs to be restored here in West Berkshire. You see, I fundamentally disagree that democracy has been removed such that it would need to be restored. In fact, the decision that this council took on the 29th of April to remove the right of certain members of the public to speak at meetings was to promote democracy. Because as the monitor officer pointed out, the alternative might be that meetings became technically inquorate and decisions taken were invalidated, or, as many other authorities have done around the country, decision making was removed from elected members and put into the hands of our Chief Executive Officer. The council has not stopped the public asking questions at meetings such as this. The fact is very clearly evident in the 23 public questions submitted to this meeting's agenda. Those questions were all published on the agenda, and they will all receive written responses, which will also be published online. The council also continues to encourage public participation in remote planning meetings that take place online rather than at physical venues. In addition to the statutory consultation required for planning applications, the council permits those who wish to indicate support or opposition to an application to do so following the publication of the planning committee agenda. Such submissions are provided in full to the committee members. Further, a summary of these submissions is provided at the meeting so that those who are watching via the internet can understand the issues in full. And I understand that viewing figures have been particularly high for these. In terms of the suggestion that democracy has been adversely impacted by the move to remote meetings, it must be remembered that all such meetings are live streamed, as this is being, and remain available online for the public to watch in full. Of the 22 public meetings that took place between April and the end of June, these have been viewed to date in the excess of 2,000 2,600 times. In fact, the last time this executive committee met has been viewed 562 times, more people viewing than would ever possibly fit within a council chamber. We are reaching a far greater audience than ever before and hearing from a wider range of residents through their submitted questions. In fact, the way in which we've embraced engagement and the work done by our officers here to enable it is something I am proud of. For you see, I speak and hear from many local authorities around the country, some of whom are still struggling to get their first virtual meeting up and running. Others who have delegated authority to officers. And I know that we have been proactive and acted swiftly to ensure decision makings in West Berkshire remains with those elected to represent their communities, and that those residents have more opportunities than ever before to participate in this programme. In terms of the specific question regarding hybrid meetings, at the extraordinary council meeting which took place on the 29th of April, it was agreed that the council would keep the position regarding remote council meetings under review. For those that are listening, perhaps I should say that hybrid meetings refer to the possibility that people can have the option to attend council meetings either remotely or digitally or in person. The council is continuing to review the position regarding meetings. The current guidance for the safe use of council buildings, which was updated on the 6th of July, recommends where meetings can take place digitally without the need of face-to-face contact, they should do so. Therefore, whilst the council is committed to moving to a new normal which would facilitate options such as hybrid meetings, it is not our intention to act contrary to government guidance. As I've already said this evening, we have attempted to follow government guidance throughout our actions. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Abbs?
I do, thank you, Leader. But before I get to that, you jumped in on the word democracy there, and we're talking about hybrid meetings is the main thrust of this. I cannot understand.
I think the word I jumped in was made to restore democracy.
Yes, exactly. So if I may make my point, as you spent quite a lot of time making your point about democracy. Democracy is the public being able to have their say, be heard, be questioned. Now, if we look at planning in specifically, they can do a written submission of 500 words that is read out. After having been on Western Area Planning and done district planning for a year now, one of the most crucial parts of understanding any planning application is the question and answer session that is undertaken of people who are presenting to the panel. So to stop them being able to be questioned, or stop the councillors being able to ask the members of the public and those who are putting planning applications forward questions and supplementary questions, and basically debate with them until we get to the bottom of what's the truth, does remove an element of democracy, because we need to be able to ask those type of questions. Here, we've skipped by this whole meeting. There were A to W of questions that are going to get some kind of response in writing. That's great. But that's A to W of supplementary questions that haven't been asked. So it is a degrading of democracy, and we're simply asking for the restoration of the gold standard that we have enjoyed in West Berkshire, where the public are allowed to ask questions and be questioned in return at the various type of meetings that we need. So my supplementary question is that although you're saying that yes, we are following government guidelines, and I keep hearing this, we follow, and I'd much prefer that we start to lead in some areas. We don't need to follow in this area. The guidelines do not stop us. They apply, they say, if you can. So hybrid meetings can be enabled. And what you seem to have said is that we're not going to do anything about restoring hybrid meetings and getting back to that gold standard in the near term. We're just going to continue to wait and see. And we have some rather big and important planning applications coming forward fairly shortly.
Okay, thank you for your supplementary. What I said was we would continue to review as the guidance is updated, and I understand that our monitoring officer is in constant conversation. The LGA have actually circulated legal guidance to all local authority monitoring officers, and having considered that, the view of our monitoring officer is that hybrid meetings are not appropriate at this time for the very reasons that were discussed at that council meeting back in April. So thank you for your question, Councillor Abs.
We're still not allowing people.
I've answered your supplementary, and we've got lots of questions to get through this evening. The next question, please, Clark. Question E. Councillor Abs, again, this is your question, but Councillor Cole is unable to be here, so you will receive a written response to this question. Thank you. Clark, Councillor G, we've got a question from Councillor Pattenden, and I believe it's Councillor Bowick that will be answering.
Hey, Leader, thank you for your question, Councillor Pattenden. There are several routes by which children may have received a laptop. One is the DFE scheme that provides laptops for care leavers, children with a social worker, and disadvantaged children in Year 10. Another is for children who are disadvantaged and they have benefited from an additional council allocation
of £20,000. And then there are children. Can you hear me? I'm having trouble with my.
We can still hear you, Councillor Bowick.
Thank you. And then there are children who've been loaned directly a laptop from their school. For the DFE scheme, there was an allocation of 4G dongles and routers so that children without appropriate internet access could have decent connectivity. The government are extending this scheme to provide better connectivity for pupils who need it. And schools who are purchasing devices to be used at home are working with suppliers to ensure that laptops are set up ready to use. Schools will support children with a program of learning through the particular virtual learning environment they use. The learning programs that they access through the VLE are used by children already in school, so they'll be familiar with them. Examples of these schools, examples of such programs include DB Primary and Purple Mash. For all schools involved, the school improvement team is available to offer advice around the use of laptops at home.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Pattenden?
Yes, thank you. So it's particularly the support that a child who's received a laptop gets after they've been given that laptop that I have heard has been a problem. You know, we've all had problems with our laptops over the last year or so, or at least, you know, some people certainly have had problems with their laptops, you know, perhaps through their own actions or due to the machines themselves. They're not infallible. They also need, you know, in a lot of cases, you know, getting a laptop and not having internet access is going to mean that laptop is, you know, not very useful to that child. So it's.
Have you got a supplementary question?
I have in a second, yes. So what I would like to know is what sort of support is given to those people, those children, after they've received their laptops?
Councillor Pattenden, the children and young people are receiving these laptops from their school, and they are supported by the school. So really, I'd be interested to know if there are any particular cases, but it's the school that is responsible. The schools have different environments, and they're not all the same, and they're buying laptops that suit the environment through which they're already delivering IT services to their pupils.
Thank you, Councillor Bowick. Can we move on to question I on our agenda this evening? Councillor Dillon, are you asking this on behalf of Councillor Drummond, or would he like a written response?
I'm happy for. Oh, sorry, I've too many screens in the way with the. There, I'm happy to ask it on his behalf.
Okay, thank you,
Leader.
Councillor Dillon. Councillor McKinnon.
Yeah, thanks, Leader, and thanks, Councillor Dillon, for asking Councillor Drummond's question. So thanks for the question, Councillor Drummond. Given this request, it should be noted that there's a balance that needs to be struck between encouraging the use of cars and encouraging alternative transport modes into town centres, particularly through the active travel initiative. There's a couple of things to say on this. The financial burden that this request would place on the government shouldn't be underestimated. Parking income nationally for all councils is just under £1 billion. In West Berkshire, let's assume that that's the case across the country, in West Berkshire, about 25% of parking income is taken in the first 2 hours. So to fund free parking, and you can trust my maths on this, for the first 6 months nationally would cost the government about £125 million. When it's highly debatable, I would argue, certainly in our area, whether 2 hours of free parking is really going to make the difference to somebody coming into the town centre and spending money in the shops. There's a debate to be had there. I'd say it's not guaranteed by any means. On the other hand, it should be noted that the government has very recently announced an income replacement scheme for councils. So in a sense, the question may have been made obsolete by the government's response. I don't know what Councillor Drummond's feelings are on it. But for lost income, such as parking, the government will provide compensation to councils at a rate of 75 pence in every pound of all relevant losses over and above the first 5% of lost income. That requires a bit more study than the very brief definition I've just given you. So the answer to the question is no. I won't be lobbying government for the reasons I've just stated. Do you have a supplementary on Councillor Drummond's behalf?
Okay, yeah, thank you for the answer. Interesting that you give the national picture when we were asking for West Berkshire. West Berkshire is a particularly rural community, and we would absolutely love for people not to be reliant on cars as much as they are, but with rural bus routes decimated over recent history, that just isn't viable at the moment, unfortunately. You debate the efficiency in effect of the policy, but we believe, and I think if you go and speak to traders, that it's worth a try. That actually 2 hours gives people the chance to be able to go in and have some food as well as to shop, and I think that's why Councillor Drummond put it at the 2 hour period. So my supplementary though, Councillor McKinnon, is you said talk about the government's income recovery scheme, 75p in the pound. So you could actually reduce parking by that same percentage to pass that back on and then recover it back as lost income.
Thanks for that, Councillor Dillon. No, I don't believe that's the case. There was an introduction to your supplementary, which I will deal with. I bring the national picture up purely to show you the calculation of the cost to national government of doing what is suggested here. The government wouldn't subsidise parking just in West Berkshire. They would have to do it nationally. So that's the reason why I bring it up, to give you the idea that it'd be £125 million. And secondly, no, I think the government and the MHCLG would take a very dim view of councils which cut parking, knowing that it was going to be covered by this income protection scheme. It's really a case of covering income which would have been anticipated before the COVID scheme arose. There is a question: councils have to cover their losses. They can't deliberately make those sort of policy suggestions knowing a bailout is coming from central government. That simply wouldn't be allowed.
Thank you, Councillor McKinnon. Okay, we move on to item J on our agenda this evening. Councillor Brooks, this is your question, but again, I'm afraid Councillor Cole isn't here, so you will get a written answer to this question from Councillor Cole. Therefore, we can move forward to item K on our agenda. Councillor Brooks, this is you again, but to Councillor Sumner, who is here.
Thank you, Leader. And thank you, Councillor Brooks, for your question. I'm sure Councillor Brooks appreciates that the traffic and road safety team that would have progressed this issue have been fully engaged by the response, particularly the recovery to COVID-19. I'm also sure that Councillor Brooks understands how the pandemic has impacted on traffic flows, and any speed review at the moment would unlikely be representative of normal traffic conditions, therefore would likely call into question the whole speed review process. However, there are some matters which I won't go into here, which I would also like at some point to share with Councillor Brooks to further this on. I am aware, acutely aware, that this issue needs to be brought to a resolution, and I would like to invite Councillor Brooks, and I suspect, and I look to Councillor Dillon to nod at this point, Councillor Vickers, to a virtual meeting with officers to look at how we can take this forward to a conclusion as quickly as possible. I will also commit to a review of the speed limit review process as a whole. This is something that I've already started conversations about, and I would look to inform that ongoing conversation after the virtual meeting that we have. And we'll look at how we can streamline what we do at the moment and to meet more frequently.
Thank you, Councillor Sumner. Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Brooks?
Thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Sumner. The frequency of the reviews taking place is very welcome that you are looking at that. You say that the pandemic has affected the highways team, but on this stretch of road, there's a lot of work gone in, and recently, in terms of cycle lanes. Orcas are threatened to be put in, which I'm worried about, frankly. So yes, I'm happy to attend a virtual meeting, but how about this, Councillor Sumner? At a socially distanced, appropriate distance between us, which is always good between us, I'm sure, socially distanced a couple of meters, would you meet me and see the traffic flow and look at the situation in the near future at that road, at the Pound Lane junction, and we can review the speeds, even in this reduced speed, reduced traffic flow. Could we do that? And you can see some of the things that people are very worried about.
Yes.
Okay.
Peace is broken out, Leader. Peace is broken out.
Thank you. I'm very pleased to hear it, and we can move forward then. Okay, we've moved to item L on our agenda this evening, which is Councillor Macro, your question for Councillor Arderwater.
Yes, so thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Macro, for your question. I would challenge the assertion in your question that there has been a sharp rise in litter and fly tipping in our district. If I can just quote the actual numbers, which were given to me less than a month ago. In last year, 18-19, there were 884 incidents of fly tipping in West Berkshire. In 2019-2020, there were 886. In other words, a rise of precisely 2 incidents. And given the 886 base, that is not, by no way is that a sharp increase. That also compares very favourably with the national average figure of 2,827. So we do not have a sharp rise, and we are fortunate, I'll say no more than that, we are fortunate in having a far lower incidence of fly tipping than in most other authorities. Having said all that, we are not and should not be complacent, and we continue to bear down where we do see fly tipping. In particular, we have and continue to deploy CCTV equipment, as you alluded to help monitor and to gather evidence for potential prosecution of offenders. We provide kits for local litter picking groups, and we are in the process of ramping up communications to householders via social media around avoiding the services of rogue traders who are behind a large number of fly tipping incidents. And we're also communicating with both tyre repair firms and fast food restaurant outlets to remind them of their responsibilities regarding disposal of waste. So in summary, we do not have a sharp rise. We absolutely are concerned about the level of in particular fly tipping, but also litter. I would urge you to pass on to residents who remind you of fly tipping to ask them to report this via the council's online reporting tool so that officers can take appropriate and prompt action. Do you have a supplementary question?
Councillor Macro?
Councillor Macro, I don't hear anything. You on mute still, perhaps?
Councillor Macro? Okay,
What?
I'm going to take it, unless the clerk speaks, we haven't got a supplementary from Councillor Macro, and move on. Can we therefore move to item M on our agenda, which is Councillor Barnett's question. So Councillor Dillon, do you wish to ask this question standing in Councillor Barnett's name? Okay, I don't know if we're having a technical problem because I can't hear anybody coming back at the moment.
Hi, sorry, it's just because it's coming off of the video screen to go back to the slides and then hit the unmute. Yeah, happy to answer, ask Councillor Barnett's question.
Okay, that's over to you, Councillor Sumner. Councillor Sumner, that's it.
Thank you, Leader. Having the same problems. Thank you, Councillor Dillon, for asking the question on behalf of Councillor Barnett. And thank you, Councillor Barnett, for your question. It is the intention that all through traffic will use the new road. How that will be achieved is dependent on consultation, and that consultation needs to be held with residents on the existing route. I believe you have had initial discussions with officers in the network management team regarding the outline proposals for the existing road network, and these will be developed and consulted on in due course, and I will ensure that local ward members are fully involved in that.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Dillon?
I'm happy that ward members will be involved in that process, Leader. Thank you for your answer, Councillor Sumner.
Thank you. And therefore, can we move on to item question F, please, which is from Councillor Abbs for Councillor Arderwater.
Yes, and again, thank you for your question, Councillor Abbs. Can the council confirm the decreased take-up of green bins? Almost exactly as I started my previous response, the reduction in green bins has been from a total of 31,562 subscribers in the 2018-2019 year down to 31,120. So a reduction of around about 400 out of 31,000, which is, yes, it is marginally less. It is not greatly less. More broadly, though, I'm happy to confirm that our garden waste service is continuing to operate successfully. It enjoyed continual service throughout the COVID lockdown, and our collections were maintained without interruption, while many other councils, including many of our neighbouring authorities, had to shut down their garden waste services. So I would like to remind ourselves and congratulate the officers concerned, along with Veolia staff, for again maintaining a very good service overall during this difficult period. So again, coming back to the actual numbers, another point that does need to be borne in mind with green waste is the variance caused by rainfall. In other words, from year to year, from season to season, there will be more or less rain, and that has quite a significant impact on, firstly, the volume collected, but also at an indirect level here, the perception of people who feel they need to have collections of green waste in their gardens. We have been reminding residents during the lockdown period to reduce waste overall, and in particular reminding our suggestions of home composting or temporary storage of waste while the household waste recycling centres were closed. So again, we have had a fairly exceptional period. We are now looking forward, we are now in the advanced preparation stage for the relaunch of another year of the garden waste scheme. And we anticipate we'll start taking new subscriptions towards the end of this month, ahead of the launch of new stickers and the new scheme at the start of September. So again, thank you for your question. Do you have a supplementary, please?
I do. Thank you, Councillor Walter. Yeah, it is true that the actual percentage of numbers is in decline. The amount of people recycling, green bin recycling, is in decline. So I'm glad you I do admit to that, and also the volume of recycling green bin waste is in decline. The amount available to go compost. Sorry, I thought someone else wanted to say something. So I think you are relying, or I'm not sure what numbers you're looking at specifically, but I got mine from the officer as well. I think we are relying a little bit on some unusual numbers in July 2018 to 2019, where in fact the scheme, the charge rate didn't actually come in until the very end of July, and we had this surge in August. So as soon as you take out that anomaly, those two anomaly months, you actually start to see a more rapid decline in the overall. So you're right, Councillor Ardell-Walter. This new scheme starts now. We should see new things very shortly. However, my supplementary question is really about why do we want to support, given our overall environmental strategy, any decrease where we are decreasing the amount of recycling that we're doing? It's the exact opposite. Even if it's a small amount, it's going the wrong way.
Okay, thank you, Counteract. So again, I'm not at all convinced by your assertion that, again, I think we'd both accept that numbers do wobble up and down in line with many factors. Yes, there was a half-year scheme which we've not decided to continue with, but I don't think that points to a long-term decline. If it did, of course, I'd be hugely concerned. Now, as I've said several times in the past, we would love to be in the position where we were so flush with cash that we did not need to charge for garden waste service. The great majority of councils, along with ourselves, are in the position where we do need to do this. This is an essential part of maintaining other council services. I did note with interest that one of our neighbouring authorities, Winchester, I believe that's controlled by the Liberal Democrats, has recently started green waste collections. So yes, in an ideal world where money was not a problem, we would not charge, we would do everything possible to incentivise free use of garden waste take-up. I'm afraid we cannot afford to do that. We will continue to provide alternatives, including obviously the House of Waste recycling centres, and encouraging composting from residents who choose not to subscribe, but it is a good service, it has worked well, and I would like to continue promoting this and using this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ardell-Walter. We come to our final member's question this evening, which is question H, which is from Councillor Pattenden for Councillor Bowick.
Thank you, Leader. Thank you for your question, Councillor Pattenden. 4 schools had a main school budget license deficit in 2019-20. At the end of the year, 2 were back into balance, and 1 had reduced its deficit by over £36,000. The overall license deficit position was improved by around £145,000, an excellent outturn, and congratulations to schools and to our officers who supported them in achieving this. 5 schools ended the year, as you said, with unplanned deficits of between less than £2,000 and just over £32,000. Of these 5 schools, only 3 have applied for a licence deficit in 2020-21. There is no doubt that most schools will have incurred additional costs related to COVID-19, and the government has already issued guidance on how approved costs can be reclaimed without requiring schools to reduce their balances. I've no doubt, Councillor Pattenden, that you've been able to look at this scheme on the government website. If you haven't been able to, then I recommend it to you. It sets out what schools can claim for, what are not appropriate, what costs they might think are appropriate that wouldn't be considered as such, and so on. A report on school-borne COVID-19 costs was considered by the Schools Forum on the 13th of July, and I know you were able to witness that. To have an agreed licence deficit, schools do need to have produced a credible deficit recovery plan, which more often than not do require savings to be made. The government's intention is that COVID costs should not add to any deficit burdens. The deficit recovery plans that schools make must always seek to minimise any negative attainment impact.
Do you have a supplementary, Councillor Pattenden?
I do, thank you, Leader, and thank you, Councillor Berwick. I mean, we were talking about attainment gaps earlier on, and we were saying that is a priority for the council. I wonder whether the portfolio holder would consider making attainment a KPI of the council.
Well, I think we saw in our in the report that Councillor Stewart presented to us earlier on that there are KPIs relating to attainment. We do monitor attainment.
So the attainment gap and reducing the attainment gap would really be a more suitable KPI, I think.
Councillor Berwick, do you want to respond to that?
I'm very happy with the KPIs that we have. If Councillor Pattenden would like to make a suggestion to me offline on how we think we can improve that, I'd certainly consider it. Happy to consider it.
Okay, thank you, everybody. That draws to an end members' questions for this evening. We can therefore move to item 14 on our agenda, which is actually exclusion of press and public. So I just ask members to agree by raising their actual hand that the press and public leave the room in accordance with Schedule 12A of the Local Government Act 1972. Thank you, everybody.
Point of order, Chairman, or Leader, sorry. I thought that the decision were going to be made in part one, rather than everything being done in part two. Again, it's only the financials between local authorities even as well, so it's all public money actually. It feels a bit remiss it being in part two, but certainly I can't see why the decision can't be made in part one. As I know you've done.
I take your point, Councillor Dillon, because we have had this conversation previously and I can't remember where it got to. I'm trying to think, because you've raised this before about part one and part two. Because I can't recall at the moment, Councillor Dillon, what I'm going to do is exclude, and we're going to, by excluding, we're going to stop live streaming so that we can have a conversation on this part two paper, okay? So I take your point entirely and I can't recall where we got to with that conversation. I can't remember. I don't know if you can, Nick.
Sorry, no, Leader, I can't recall where that got to.
Okay, so for this evening, we will move to exclude the press and public. And can I have a show of hands to do so from the executive? Thank you. Therefore, I will wait until Phil confirms that we're no longer live streaming before we move to the part two paper.
Okay, just ending the live stream.